August 2nd, 216 BC. The sun has barely risen over the plains of southern Italy when 87,000 men draw their weapons. On one side, the largest army Rome has ever assembled: veterans, citizens, men fighting for the survival of their republic. On the other, a Carthaginian general who hasn't lost a battle in 3 years. A man history would eventually call the father of strategy. His name was Hannibal Barca. By nightfall, as many as 70,000 Roman soldiers would lie dead on this field. It remains to this day one of the single bloodiest days in history of human warfare. This is the Battle of Cannae. To understand Cannae, you have to understand what came before it. 3 years earlier, in 218 BC, Hannibal Barca did something Rome considered impossible. He marched an army, complete with war elephants, over the Alps in winter. He emerged into northern Italy, battered, frostbitten, and outnumbered. And then he started winning. At the Trebia River, he lured a Roman army into a freezing ambush and destroyed it. At Lake Trasimene, he hid his entire force in the morning fog along a hillside and massacred 15,000 soldiers who never even got up to form their lines. Rome was reeling. The Senate responded with a temporary dictatorship. They appointed a cautious general named Fabius Maximus, who understood one thing clearly: don't fight Hannibal on open ground. Follow him, harass him, starve him out. But Romans are not patient people. The people called Fabius Cunctator, the delayer. It was meant as an insult. His strategy kept Rome safe, but it also kept Hannibal free to ravage the Italian countryside, burning farms, sacking towns, recruiting Rome's allied Italian cities to switch sides. The Senate had enough. Fabius's term expired, and in his place they elected two new consuls, men who promised a decisive, crushing victory. Their names were Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro. Paulus was experienced, cautious. Varro was aggressive, popular, and supremely confident. Between them, they commanded the largest Roman army ever fielded, 8 legions, plus allies, roughly 86,000 men. They were marching to end the Hannibalic War in a single afternoon. Hannibal had roughly 50,000. On paper, this should have been a Roman victory before the first sword was drawn. But Hannibal wasn't reading from their script. The site Hannibal chose tells you everything about his genius. Cannae, a small hilltop settlement near the Aufidus River in the flat heel of Italy. No hills, no forests, no terrain features to hide behind, just open, featureless plain, perfect ground for cavalry, and a killing field for infantry. The Romans chose this very terrain because they thought it suited them. Their infantry was the finest in the world in close formation, giving them a flat field and enough men, and they believed they could simply bulldoze anything in front of them. On August 2nd, the armies deployed. The Romans formed up as they always did, a dense, deep rectangle of infantry in the center, cavalry protecting the flanks. Their thinking was straightforward: mass enough soldiers in the middle, push hard enough, and the enemy line breaks. Consul Varro commanded on the left, Paulus on the right. Hannibal's deployment was different, and it would change warfare forever. He placed his weakest troops, Gauls and Spanish infantry, in the very center of his line. But he curved them forward, bowing outward toward the Romans like the chest of a man leaning into the wind. On the wings, he positioned his best African infantry, battled hardened veterans, and captured Roman armor. And on the cavalry flanks, he placed his finest horsemen, Iberian and Gallic cavalry on the left, the legendary Numidian light cavalry on the right. Looking at the two formations, a Roman officer might have felt confident. They outnumbered the center opposite them by a wide margin. That was exactly what Hannibal wanted them to think. The battle opened, as most ancient battles did, with skirmishers. Light troops hurling javelins, probing for weaknesses, then falling back. Then the cavalry crashed together on the flanks. On the Roman right, Paulus's Italian cavalry met Hannibal's heavier Iberian and Gallic horsemen. It was brutal, grinding, close quarters work, men stabbing with swords, unhorsing each other, fighting on foot when they had to. The Carthaginian cavalry was superior, and after ferocious fighting, the Italian cavalry broke and fled. On the Roman left, it was a different story for now. The Numidians, North African light cavalry, were masters of a particular kind of warfare: harass, feint, retreat, lure. They kept the Roman allied cavalry busy, neither committing fully nor breaking, just holding them in place. Meanwhile, in the center, the main event began. 86,000 Roman soldiers began to push, and push they did. The Gauls and Spanish in Hannibal's center began to bend, then give way. Slowly, the convex bow of Hannibal's line reversed, caving inward as the sheer Roman mass pressed forward. From the Roman ranks, this must have felt like victory. The enemy was retreating. They were winning. Men pushed harder, pressing into the gap. And here is where the trap closed. As the Roman center pushed deeper into the retreating Carthaginian line, something began to happen on the flanks that the Romans couldn't see from the inside of the crush of bodies. The African veterans on Hannibal's wings, who had been standing, waiting, watching, now pivoted inward. Left and right, they wheeled and attacked the exposed Roman flanks, like two arms closing around a chest. And then the cavalry returned. On the right flank, Hannibal's horsemen, having routed the Italian cavalry, didn't pursue them into the countryside, a common, undisciplined mistake of ancient warfare. Instead, they rode the length of the battlefield and struck the Roman allied cavalry on the other flank from behind. The Numidians had done their job. The allied cavalry collapsed. Now, full horror became clear. The Romans were surrounded on all sides completely. What followed was not a battle, it was a slaughter. Packed so tightly together that many soldiers couldn't raise their arms to fight, the Roman legions became a single suffocating mass of men. Carthaginian soldiers on every side cut them down methodically. Those who tried to flee were ridden down by cavalry. Those who surrendered were killed or captured. Roman dead fell in heaps so thick that men were crushed to death before a blade ever touched them. Consul Lucius Aemilius Paulus refused to flee. Ancient sources tell us he was offered a horse that he might escape. He declined. He had come to fight Rome's battle, and he would die in it. He was found dead on the field, surrounded by the bodies of his men. Consul Varro survived, and Rome, to his credit, thanked him for not despairing of the Republic. The historian Livy describes Hannibal's officers walking the field afterward, finding men buried alive under piles of corpses, begging to be killed, finding Romans who had cut their own throats rather than be captured, finding Carthaginian soldiers dead beside Romans, the two locked together in their final struggle. The estimates of the dead vary between ancient sources, but modern historians generally accept somewhere between 47,000 and 70,000 Romans killed in a single afternoon. By some reckonings, this represents 1 in 5 adult male Roman citizens. Hannibal's losses, perhaps 6,000 men. After Cannae, much of southern Italy flipped to Hannibal's side. Capua, one of Rome's most important allied cities, opened its gates to him. Philip V of Macedon sent ambassadors to negotiate an alliance. Carthage rejoiced, and yet Rome did not fall. What happens next is perhaps the most remarkable part of the story. Rome, a republic that had just lost 15% of its military-age male population in one battle, did not negotiate, did not collapse. The Senate met, set a limit on public mourning, 3 days, and began raising new legions. Slaves were freed and armed. Boys below the minimum age were conscripted. Rome dug in. They went back to the Fabian strategy. No more open field battles with Hannibal. Instead, they tightened the noose, besieging cities that had defected, cutting off Hannibal's supply lines, refusing him the decisive engagement he needed to break Roman will. Hannibal had won the greatest tactical victory in ancient history, but he lacked the siege equipment and the manpower to storm Rome itself, and Carthage. fractured by political rivalry back home, never sent him the reinforcements he needed. He remained in Italy for 15 years after Cannae, undefeated on the battlefield and yet slowly losing the war. In 202 BC, a Roman general named Scipio Africanus, who had studied Hannibal carefully, who had learned everything there was to learn, met Hannibal at the Battle of Zama, and using an adaptation of Hannibal's own encirclement tactics, he defeated him. Hannibal would live out his days in exile, passing from court to court across the eastern Mediterranean, always hunted by Rome. Eventually cornered in Bithynia, modern day Turkey, he took poison rather than be captured. His last words, according to legend, were, "Let us now put an end to the great anxiety of the Romans, who have thought it too long and too hard a task to wait for the death of a hated old man." 2,200 years later, Cannae is still taught at every major military academy on Earth. West Point, Sandhurst, the Russian General Staff College, the concept Hannibal demonstrated, the double envelopment, the pincer movement, drawing an enemy forward and encircling them, became the foundational template of strategic military thinking. Von Schlieffen built Germany's entire World War I opening strategy around it. Norman Schwarzkopf's famous left hook in the Gulf War echoed it. Every commander who has ever dreamed of encircling and annihilating an enemy force has been, consciously or not, following in Hannibal's footsteps. But perhaps Cannae's deepest lesson has nothing to do with tactics at all. Hannibal won every battle and lost the war. Rome lost the worst battlefield defeat in its history and survived to build an empire. Because in the end, Cannae teaches us that the side that refuses to admit it's beaten sometimes isn't. On those hot August plains, Hannibal Barca achieved something no general had ever achieved before, and few have matched since. He turned an enemy of 50,000 into a trap for nearly twice their number, and he closed it perfectly. It wasn't enough to destroy Rome, but it was enough to make Rome and the world remember his name forever. This has been the Battle of Cannae. If you want to go deeper, drop a comment below and make sure you're subscribed for more ancient history.